Hello, you have joined the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigations Board, or CSB's public business meeting. We will now begin this meeting with Steve Owens, the chairperson of the CSB.
Well, thank you, Brian, and hello to everyone, and Happy New Year to you all. I want to thank you for joining us here today. As Brian said, I'm Steve Owens. I'm the chairperson of the Chemical Safety Board. I've been a member of the board since February of last year, and in July, I was nominated by President Biden to be the CSB chair when our former chairperson resigned. And I was confirmed to be the chair by the Senate back in December. Since our last public meeting in October, board member Sylvia Johnson and I have continued to work very closely with the dedicated career staff at the CSB to address the many challenges that are facing this agency, including reducing the substantial backlog in investigation reports. And in that regard, I'm very pleased to say that over a 5-month period at the end of 2022, from late July through late December, the CSB completed and issued 6 investigation reports, an incredible achievement for this agency. And this was after not issuing any reports for over 10 months before then. 3 of these reports were issued between July and our last meeting in October. These were the fatal 2017 Loy Lane Box Company explosion in St. Louis, Missouri, which was presented at our July meeting, the 2016 Sunoco flash fire in Nederland, Texas, which was presented at our October meeting that injured 7 workers, the 2019 Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery fire and explosion in Philadelphia, which also was presented at our October meeting. And that incident released over 5,000 pounds of toxic hydrofluoric acid. It launched a 38,000-pound vessel fragment off-site that landed on the other side of the river in Philadelphia. It also caused an estimated property damage loss of $750 million. In December, we issued 3 more reports: the 2019 fatal TPC plant explosions and fire in Port Neches, Texas, the 2018 Karaari America ethylene release and fire in Pasadena, Texas, that injured 23 workers, and the 2018 Husky Energy refinery explosion and fire in Superior, Wisconsin, that injured 36 workers, caused roughly $550 million in damage to the facility, and released 39,000 pounds of flammable hydrocarbon vapor into the air. All of these reports are now available on the CSB website. This was a truly remarkable effort by this agency, and I want to thank each and every one of the hardworking career staff here. Everybody here played an important role in getting this done, and we greatly appreciate their hard work and commitment to the mission of the CSB. We couldn't have done any of this without them, and we're so happy that we have so many career committed and dedicated workers here at the agency. We still have such a long way to go, but we're working to complete the remaining reports in the backlog by the end of this calendar year. Our updated closure plan for these reports is posted on the CSB website, and you can go there and see what our plan is for the coming calendar year. Along with completing and releasing the 6 investigation reports, we also issued updates on 5 other investigations during the last 4 months of 2022. These are the 2020 fatal explosion and fire at the Optima Bell facility in Bell, West Virginia, the 2020 fatal polypropylene release and explosion at the Watson grinding facility in Houston, Texas, the 2020 fatal hydrogen chloride release at the Walker polysilicon facility in Charleston, Tennessee, the 2021 fatal liquid nitrogen release at the Foundation Food Group facility in Gainesville, Georgia, and the 2021 fatal explosion and fire at the Yinkin Majestic facility in Columbus, Ohio. The agency had stopped providing such reports during 2021, but as we've said before, we're committed to doing them because they provide very important information about our investigations to the public and our stakeholders. As we also discussed at our last meeting, back in September, we deployed a team to investigate the fatal fire and explosion at the BP Husky refinery in Ohio. Before this, the CSB had not undertaken a deployment in 14 months. As part of our investigation, our team has conducted more than 100 interviews, and they are continuing to gather additional critical information about the incident hereafter. During the last 3 months of 2022, the CSB also released 3 new safety videos, which to date have collectively been viewed by nearly 2.5 million times on our YouTube site. Most notably, a video on the PES refinery fire and explosion received 1 million views in the first week after its release, more than any other CSB video has ever received in such a short time. We've also continued to increase transparency and provide more information to the public. In particular, we've been posting data on chemical incidents reported to the CSB under our accidental release reporting rule, which went into effect in 2020. As of this week, the data covers 231 chemical incidents that resulted in 31 fatalities, 129 serious injuries, and substantial property damage to more than 106 chemical facilities nationwide. And speaking of the release reporting rule, I want to remind everyone that back in August, we issued a guidance document that addressed questions about the rules requirements. Among many other things, the guidance emphasized that if the owner or operator of a facility is unsure about whether an incident should be reported to the CSB, you should report it to us, rather than risk violating the rule by failing to report. There's no sanction associated with reporting an accidental release that in retrospect didn't have to be reported. But we want to make very clear that failure to report an accidental release when required by this rule could lead us to refer the matter to EPA for enforcement, as we're authorized to do under our statute. Finally, we also completed our new strategic plan, and it's been posted on the website as well. The plan's a bit behind schedule because for some reason, the former leadership at the CSB did not take any action to update the prior strategic plan when it was expiring in 2021. When I became the interim executive at the end of July, Board Member Johnson and I had to jumpstart the strategic planning process, but we got it done in a very short period of time. And I want to thank again all the terrific career staff at the CSB for their great effort in pulling the new plan together, on top of everything else they were doing during the last several months of 2022. During today's meeting, we will hear presentations from the CSB staff on a variety of topics, including about recommendation status changes recently adopted by the board in our reports for the TPC, Carrare, and Husky investigations. We'll also have the opportunity for you to meet and hear from incoming board member Kathy Sandoval. Kathy was confirmed to the board by the Senate in December at the same time that I was confirmed to be the chair. And although she's not yet officially come on board to the CSB, we invited her to join us today to introduce herself to you and to say a few words. We're very much looking forward to having Kathy with us on the board, and we're very pleased that she is able to be with us today. But before I turn the floor over to Board Member Johnson and incoming Board Member Sandoval for their remarks, and to our staff for their presentations, I want to take care of one bit of housekeeping. At the end of today's meeting, we will be providing an opportunity for public comments, just as we did at our last two public meetings. In the interest of time, we ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes, and please use the icon on your screen to raise your hand so that you can be recognized to speak. And now I'd like to turn this over to Board Member Sylvia Johnson for her remarks, and then to incoming Board Member Kathy Sandoval. Sylvia, please go ahead, and then Kathy, please do so as well when Sylvia has concluded. So Sylvia.
Thank you, Steve. I begin my remarks today with congratulating you on your confirmation and appointment as chairperson of the Chemical Safety Board. You and I have worked together over the past year, and I've both been impressed and inspired by your leadership and commitment to the CSB's core mission. There's no doubt that your ability to lead is without question, and I know for sure that the CSB is in good hands with you at the helm. The spirit of excellence, camaraderie, and dedication you've already brought to the agency is to be commended, and I look forward to our continued work together. To our soon-to-be board member and colleague, Kathy Sandoval, congratulations on your confirmation and appointment as well. I'm thrilled you will be joining us here at the CSB very soon. I know you will be a tremendous asset to us as we continue to build on the momentum that has already begun. I'm confident that your contributions will prove invaluable to the work ahead, so welcome. I would now like to take a moment to highlight the CSB's investigative work over the past 25 years. The CSB was established by the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 and began operations on January 4th, 1998. Since the beginning, the CSB has conducted root cause investigations of some of the highest consequence chemical incidents that have occurred in the United States. From 1998 to 2023, the CSB has addressed critical chemical safety gaps and deficiencies through its investigative reports and issued recommendations to companies, standards developing organizations, academia, industry associations, emergency responders, labor groups, and state and federal government agencies. The 2005 BP Texas City investigation brought issues related to process safety to the forefront of a national conversation. This investigation also saw the beginning of CSB's highly successful video program. The agency started with an animation of the sequence of events leading to the massive fire and explosion that took the lives of 15 workers and injured over 170 others. Since that first animation, the CSB has released over 80 videos with more than 266,000 subscribers and almost 50 million views on YouTube. Some of our other investigations include our 2010 investigation into a fatal explosion at a power plant in Connecticut that resulted in a ban on an activity referred to as a gas blow, which was found to be the cause of a massive explosion that killed 6 workers. The CSB's 2012 investigation of a massive fire at the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California, brought about new refinery safety rules for the entire state of California. When Hurricane Harvey hit the Houston area in 2017, our Arkema investigation in Crosby, Texas, examined issues related to extreme weather events and how they impact the chemical industry. The CSB brought issues of emergency response at chemical facilities to light following that devastating hurricane. CSB recommendations continue to drive safety changes to help protect workers, the public, and the environment. Our 25th anniversary is a reminder that these incidents don't happen in a vacuum. They resonate across industry and the communities in which they occur. These are just a few highlights of the many successes the CSB has had in its short history. As a board member, I am extraordinarily proud of our work and plan to continue that work throughout my term here at the CSB. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the meeting. And now to you, Kathy.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, and congratulations to Chairman Steve Owens on his confirmation as chair. And thank you and congratulations to board members Sylvia Johnson, and thank you to the board members and the staff of CSB for your warm welcome and support as I complete the federal government onboarding process. So I look forward to joining the CSB formally very soon, and thank you for this opportunity. I'd also like to thank President Biden for this nomination and the U.S. Senate for their confirmation, including the Environment and Public Works Committee. And thanks to the community that supports and is supported by the Chemical Safety Board. So as you know, the Chemical Safety Board identifies the root causes of chemical safety incidents and makes recommendations to prevent these incidents. And the incidents that the Chemical Safety Board addresses, these are often lose calamities. They may injure or kill workers, cause community harms, including injury, death, property damage, and loss of job opportunities, release hazardous chemicals into the environment, into the water, air, and land, and generate losses for investors and insurers. So the goal of preventing these losses is important for all of us. And this is also a deeply felt goal for many of us, including those who've been affected by chemical safety incidents. At my confirmation hearing, I recalled the sad death of my great uncle, Ishmael Martinez, who was killed in a chemical explosion in the small town of Benton, Arizona, where my mother grew up. And when that powder plant that made nitroglycerin-based dynamite exploded, he and several other workers were killed. So this happened in the days before the Chemical Safety Board, before OSHA, before the EPA. And now we have the opportunity working together to continue to prevent these incidents. And indeed, CSB has been working towards that goal for the past 25 years. So I look forward to joining the CSB hopefully shortly and to working on this critical mission to protect American safety and to promote American opportunity in these critical industries. Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you, Kathy. Or as I said, we're very excited about you joining us, keeping our fingers crossed that will be soon, and certainly sympathize and appreciate the onboarding process that you're going through at the moment. So again, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to be with us here today, even though you're not on the clock yet with the CSB. So. And I also want to thank Sylvia, Board Member Johnson, for those very gracious, very kind remarks. They were unnecessary, but they sure made me feel good. And she read them just like I wrote them. So I appreciate that. And now we'll actually get on with the meat of the meeting today. I'll turn it over to Steve Kleist, who's the CSB's Executive Director of Investigations and Recommendations, to lead us through the rest of the agenda. So Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. The Office of Investigations and Recommendations will be making 4 presentations this afternoon. The first presentation will highlight the successful closure of 2 recommendations issued by the board in connection with the Arkema and Loy Lang investigations. We will also highlight the key findings from 3 recently completed investigations. Chuck, would you please proceed with the first presentation on the recommendation closure?
Thank you very much, Steve. I am ready to go. So the highlighted recommendations we're going to talk about, as Steve said, is one is from the Arkema Inc. chemical plant fire investigation, and that's R1 to Arkema Crosby facility. And the other is the pressure vessel explosion at Loy Lang Box Company investigation, and that is R7 to Arise Incorporated. Now the first investigation we're going to talk on was one of the ones that that board member Sylvia Johnson highlighted, addressing extreme weather. In August of 2017, Hurricane Harvey, a Category 4 hurricane, made landfall in southeastern Texas, and the rainfall exceeded design elevations. As a result, they lost power, they lost emergency power, then they lost refrigeration. They had refrigeration trucks on site, and eventually those went down as well. And then the peroxides inside began to decompose, and then they caught fire, and it was a massive fire. And as a result, 200 of the local residents had to evacuate for at least a week. So we conducted the investigation, and as a result, we issued a recommendation to the Arkema Crosby facility, asking them to reduce flood risk to as low as reasonably practicable and ensure that safeguards for flooding meet independent layers of protection requirements. So what did Arkema do? Next slide, please. So in the implementation of R1, and this took a little while. I want to emphasize before we start going through it how much they had to do. They completed a site elevation survey and hydrology study. Then, based on the assessments there, they implemented all of the requirements. They underwent a PHA using the layers of protection approaches as we recommended. And in rebuilding their facility, in addition to addressing the flood elevation issues, they had to get all of their permits back in place. And as a result of what happened, Harris County, where Crosby facility is, they updated all their permit standards. So it was quite an evolution, but they went through all the permit process for all their buildings and everything. They had to update all their firefighting and other components in the buildings, and they eventually did it, and they provided a tremendous amount of paperwork to evidence that they had. And as a result, the board voted to change their status to closed acceptable action. So I would say great job, Arkema Crosby facility. The next recommendation we're going to talk about came from the pressure vessel explosion at Loy Lang Box Company. This happened in April of 2017. A pressure vessel ruptured and propelled out of the building into another building. The rupture was due to an inadequate repair, and as a result, there were 4 fatalities. One worker who was there locally at the scene when it happened, and then 3 members of the public where the pressure vessel had propelled. As a result of the incident and the investigation, the CSB issued a recommendation to Arise Incorporated, and we asked them, and they were the inspectors who oversaw the repair. We asked them to include prescriptive elements in their boiler and pressure vessel repair and alteration inspection and acceptance process that would prevent acceptance from a non-conforming repair or alteration. And the reason we asked for this is actually the inspector for Arise, when he went through the process, he executed the process that they had correctly. The process just was not adequate. So next slide, please. What did Arise do in the implementation of R7? Well, they updated their quality processes. Now that included additional inspection points or hold points, as they refer to them, to verify repair compliance. So in other words, they could a repair could be started, but until that inspector came in and verified certain aspects of it, they had to hold that repair until that inspector did buy off on it. Now, in addition to those extra inspection points, they also put in an annual audit requirement by inspector supervisors to verify that those new inspection points were included, in addition to other things that the supervisor had to verify as far as the work of the folks that they were supervising. So as a result of the documentation that they provided, the board voted to close this, or to change the status of this recommendation to close acceptable action also on January 17th. And so again, good job to Arise Incorporated. Well, that concludes the highlighted recommendations in our presentation today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present them. And with that, I will pass it back to Steve Kleist.
Thank you, Chuck. The next presentation will be on the accidental release event that occurred at the TPC Group plant in Port Neches, Texas. Butch Griffin was the investigator in charge. Supervisory Chemical Investigator Lauren Grimm will be making the presentation. Lauren, please proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Steve. Again, as Steve said, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Butch Griffin, who was the investigator in charge, but as he's not able to be here today, I will be presenting on his behalf. Next slide, please. On November 27th, 2019, a series of explosions occurred at the TPC Group Port Neches operations facility located in Port Neches, Texas, after highly flammable butadiene released from the process unit. The explosions caused a process tower to propel through the air and land within the facility, other process towers to fall within the unit, extensive facility damage, and fires that burned for more than a month. The butadiene unit was destroyed, forcing the facility to cease butadiene production operations indefinitely. As of the date of our report, the butadiene production operations remain shut down. 2 TPC employees and a contractor reported minor injuries, and according to media reports, at least 5 local residents reported injuries. Officials in Jefferson County, Texas declared the county to be in a state of disaster and issued a mandatory 4-mile radius evacuation order that affected people in the cities of Port Neches, Groves, Nederland, and a portion of Port Arthur. The explosion also led to reduced usage of the Sabine-Neches waterway, which is the nation's 3rd largest waterway by cargo volume and is a major economic driver in the United States. The incident caused $450 million in on-site property damage and $153 million in off-site property damage to nearby homes and businesses. On June 1st, 2022, TPC filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The CSB investigated the incident and found that a dangerous substance known as popcorn polymer, which is prone to forming in processes with high purity butadiene, accumulated in a temporary dead leg that was created when a process pump was taken out of service for maintenance. Popcorn polymer is dangerous because once it forms, its continued growth and expansion can generate high pressures that may ultimately rupture equipment. The pump that was taken out of service remained offline for a period of 114 days. During this extensive offline period, popcorn polymer developed and exponentially expanded in the dead leg piping section until the internal piping pressure increased to the point that the piping ruptured, which released butadiene from the process unit. Our investigation identified 4 safety issues, including dead leg identification and control, process hazard analysis action item implementation, control and prevention of popcorn polymer, and remotely operated emergency isolation valves. The first safety issue is dead leg identification and control. The CSB found that TPC had a procedure in place to minimize popcorn polymer hazards associated with dead legs. However, the CSB found no evidence that the inability to implement some of the procedure's requirements when the pump was taken out of service triggered any type of safety evaluation of the temporary dead leg associated with the offline pump. TPC did not have an effective safety management system to identify when the safety critical procedure could not be conducted as intended, or to identify the associated safety implications when the procedure could not be implemented. In addition, TPC's dead leg procedure did not identify all potential temporary dead legs within the unit, which likely contributed to personnel not taking action to prevent popcorn polymer formation in the dead leg created by the out-of-service pump. Further, the American Chemistry Council's Butadiene Product Stewardship Guidance Manual does not contain information on the potential consequences of dead legs or how companies should identify, control, or prevent them. The second safety issue is process hazard analysis action item implementation. TPC's 2016 PHA team recommended that TPC ensure that piping associated with out-of-service equipment and out-of-service equipment and high purity butadiene service be flushed monthly. The implementation of the 2016 PHA recommendation could have helped prevent the incident by requiring personnel to flush the piping associated with the out-of-service pump. And this could have prevented the buildup of popcorn polymer within the dead leg. However, the 2016 PHA recommendation was never implemented, and the dead leg conditions leading to the incident were not mitigated. Our third safety issue is the control and prevention of popcorn polymer. TPC was conducting operational trials leading up to the incident, and after these trials began, an increase in popcorn polymer formation occurred throughout the butadiene unit. The CSB determined that TPC did not have sufficient internal policies to lead employees to shut down and clean the butadiene unit after it experienced exceedingly high levels of hazardous popcorn polymer. The CSB also determined that additional guidance in the American Chemistry Council's Butadiene Product Stewardship Guidance Manual, providing mitigation strategies that facilities should follow when popcorn polymer is identified, could help prevent future popcorn polymer-induced loss of containment events. And the fourth and final safety issue is remotely operated emergency isolation valves. The TPC butadiene process was not equipped with remotely operated emergency isolation valves designed to mitigate process releases remotely from a safe location. The TPC incident demonstrates what can happen when portions of a chemical processing facility cannot be remotely isolated during a release and fire. Severe explosions caused a process tower to propel through the air and land within the facility, other process towers to fall within the unit, extensive facility damage, and fires that burned for more than a month. Manual and locally controlled emergency block valves are unreliable in this type of catastrophic incident. Since the valves cannot be safely accessed in these major incidents, the equipment cannot be isolated. The CSB issued five recommendations as a result of this investigation. To TPC, the CSB recommends that 1, TPC develop and implement a program to identify and control or eliminate dead legs. 2, that TPC passivate equipment in high purity butadiene service. And 3, that TPC incorporate the recording of any paper-based process performance information into TPC's electronic records management system. To the American Chemistry Council, the CSB recommends that the ACC revise the Butadiene Product Stewardship Guidance Manual to include guidance on identifying and controlling or eliminating dead legs in high purity butadiene service. And 2, that ACC revise the manual to provide guidance on a methodology to identify what should be considered excessive or dangerous amounts of popcorn polymer and mitigation strategies. And with that, concludes my presentation. And Steve Kleist, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. The next presentation will be on the accidental release event that occurred at the Carrari American Eval plant in Pasadena, Texas. Senior Chemical Incident Investigator Dan Tolima served as the investigator in charge, and he will be making the presentation. We will start with a video that was developed by the CSB that explains the essential elements of that incident. Brian, could you begin the video, please?
May 19th, 2018. The Carrari America chemical plant in Pasadena, Texas. The plant manufactures Eval, a copolymer made from ethylene and vinyl alcohol. Eval is used in food packaging and storage containers. Carrari shut down the Pasadena plant on April 6th for a maintenance turnaround and to install various equipment upgrades. By May 18th, Carrari operations personnel were taking steps to bring one of 4 reactors back online. The reactor, known as Eval Reactor 2, looked similar to the others, but had a lower maximum design pressure of 740 psi. The design pressure of the other 3 reactors was 1150 psi. The reactor already had liquid methanol and ethylene vapor inside as operators began incrementally raising the reactor system pressure. They did so by adding additional ethylene vapor. Pressure was raised in order to reach the target pressure necessary for the reactor to start up, while also checking for leaks. In the meantime, chilled liquid from the plant's newly installed refrigeration system was circulating through the reactor's heat exchanger. After 11:20 p.m., the reactor pressure, together with the low temperature from the chilled liquid, created conditions that allowed the ethylene gas in the reactor to condense to liquid. This caused the temperature in the reactor to decrease. Around 7 a.m. on May 19th, a supervisor noticed the low temperature in the reactor and instructed operators to stop circulating the chilled liquid through the heat exchanger. The reactor was surrounded by a heat transfer jacket, which uses water to control the temperature inside the reactor. To further help warm the reactor, Carrari personnel periodically added steam to the jacket, increasing the temperature of the water. As the temperature of the reactor increased with each injection of steam to the heat transfer jacket, some liquid ethylene inside the reactor vaporized. This raised the pressure inside the reactor. By about 8:45 a.m., the reactor reached the target operating pressure of nearly 600 psi, but pressure continued to increase. Around 9 a.m., the pressure reached 640 psi, and the high-pressure alarm went off. A board operator responded by periodically opening a pressure control valve to send some of the vapor inside the reactor to a flare. The board operator was concerned about exceeding environmental emissions limits for the flare. As a result, he did not fully open the pressure control valve. He was also focused on other startup activities and did not realize the valve was not open as much as it needed to be to bring the pressure under control. Pressure inside the reactor continued to climb. Shortly after 10 a.m., operators initiated the next step in the startup. At that time, a new board operator took over and noticed the pressure in the reactor was over 700 psi. But the operator did not recall that this reactor had a maximum design pressure of 740 psi. He thought it could withstand higher pressure like the others. Like the first board operator, the new operator only partially opened the pressure control valve, not realizing how dangerously close the pressure was to the reactor's limit. The partially open control valve was not enough to relieve the pressure in the reactor. Shortly before 10:30 a.m., the emergency pressure relief system activated. High-pressure ethylene vapor discharged from the reactor into the atmosphere. It was released horizontally toward an area where many people were working, rather than vertically to a safe location. Soon after, a nearby welding machine likely ignited the vapor, and a large fire erupted. 23 people were injured, many as they urgently tried to evacuate. The ethylene-fueled fire stopped after approximately 3 minutes, when the emergency relief valve closed as pressure in the reactor normalized. In total, over 2,000 pounds of ethylene was ejected to the atmosphere. For more information, visit csb.gov.
Dan Talima will begin his presentation on the incident.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Dan Talima. I'm a senior chemical incident investigator. I'm in my 14th year with the CSB. Today, I'll be providing further discussion of our investigation of the Karaari incident. Next slide, Brian. The board approved the Karaari report on December 16th, and both the report and the animation we viewed were released a few days later. The 182-page report is available on the CSB website and details the Karaari incident and our full analysis of the 17 safety issues. Next slide. As we saw in the animation, the incident at Karaari occurred during a reactor startup after a turnaround. At the time of the incident, 266 employees and contract workers were on site. 23 of these workers were injured. During the incident, workers in the immediate area tried to escape from the ethylene release and fire. Back one slide, Brian. 266 employees and contract workers were on site. 23 of these workers were injured. During the incident, workers in the immediate area tried to escape from the ethylene release and fire. While fleeing, Some workers were injured as they jumped from the second or third story of the plant structure. Other workers were wearing fall protection equipment that physically attached them to structures in the area, which delayed their escape from the fire and increased the severity of their injuries. 2 injured workers were life flighted from the Karari facility. 1 contract worker remained in critical condition for several days from life-threatening burns, but survived. Okay, next slide, Brian. The CSB determined that the cause of the incident was Karari's long-standing emergency pressure relief system design that discharged flammable ethylene vapor through horizontally aimed piping into the air near workers. Had Karari's emergency pressure relief system discharged vapor from the reactor to a safe location, the flammable ethylene gas should not have harmed any workers. Karari's long chain of weakly implemented safety management systems that made up its overall process safety management system also contributed to the incident. In addition to the management system elements that Karari used to manage the eval reactor's emergency pressure relief system, other elements contributed by allowing high pressure conditions to develop inside the chemical reactor system. The combination of these ineffective management system elements culminated with the reactor's emergency pressure relief system activating and discharging flammable ethylene vapor into the air, where it ignited near non-essential workers that were not essential to the startup of the chemical reactor. Karari could have prevented these injuries by implementing a policy to exclude workers not involved in the startup. Furthermore, Karari could have taken protective actions during upset conditions to prevent worker injuries. For example, when the reactor's high pressure alarm sounded, signaling upset conditions, Karari should have stopped work and evacuated the workers from the area. The next slide. Our report details these 17 safety issues identified during the investigation. There are also 47 findings that stem from these safety issues. As a result of these findings, the CSB issued 12 safety recommendations to address the gaps that still existed between our investigation findings and Karari's own post-incident corrective actions. In our discussion today, we are focusing on the first of the 17 safety issues, the emergency pressure relief system discharge design. The next slide. Of all the factors that contributed to injuring the 23 workers, none was more significant than the design of the outlet piping from the reactor's emergency pressure relief system, which caused the release to be aimed toward an area where workers were present. Had Karari designed this piping to discharge the flammable ethylene vapor to a safe location, this incident could have unfolded in precisely the same sequence, but without harming people. With well-designed outlet piping, the emergency pressure relief system should have discharged the excess flammable ethylene vapor vertically upward, well above and safely away from workers. Next slide. Karari's emergency pressure relief system did not and does not discharge ethylene vapor to a flare. The CSB has historically advocated against discharging flammable vapor into the ambient air when a flare system can serve both to contain the flammable vapor and then combust it safely. The CSB has stated that a flare system is an inherently safer option compared with dispersing flammable vapor into the atmosphere. Nevertheless, industry standards do provide users with guidance for directing flammable vapor vertically upward into the ambient air safely. Next slide. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers Design Code, which is used to build many of the vessels in the chemical industry, including Eval Reactor 2, requires that outlet piping from emergency pressure relief systems shall lead to a safe place of discharge. Next slide. Also, existing industry standards rely on vertical discharge for safely dispersing flammable vapor into the air. API 520 describes how users should design piping for discharging materials from the emergency pressure relief systems. As shown in this slide, for atmospheric discharge, API 520 demonstrates the piping should be aimed vertically upward. API states that published industry studies have shown that flammable gases can be discharged into the air safely by following the design guidelines in API 521. Among other considerations, emergency pressure relief system outlet piping should direct the release of flammable vapor vertically upward to satisfy these design guidelines. Next slide. Existing industry standards also answer the question of what is an unsafe location. API defined an unsafe location for discharging flammable vapor from emergency pressure relief systems in its industry guidance document, Performance Indicators, API 754. According to API 754, an unsafe location includes an atmospheric pressure relief device discharge that results in a potential hazard to personnel due to the formation of flammable mixtures at ground level or on elevated work structures. The next slide. 30 years ago, OSHA issued its final rule for what we now commonly call the PSM standard. In the preamble of this standard, OSHA stated, releases of toxic, reactive, or flammable liquids and gases in processes involving highly hazardous chemicals have been reported for many years. Recent major incidents include the 1984 Bhopal incident, resulting in more than 2,000 deaths, the October 1989 Phillips 66 chemical plant incident, resulting in 24 deaths and 132 injuries, the July 1990 Arco chemical incident, resulting in 19 deaths, the July 1990 BASF incident, resulting in 2 deaths and 41 injuries, and the May 1991 IMC incident, resulting in 8 deaths and 128 injuries. Of the 5 chemical disasters that OSHA cited, 2 of these events, Bhopal and BASF, involved discharging chemicals from emergency pressure relief systems in a manner that caused great harm to people. Notably, the BASF event resulted from not ensuring that a reactor's emergency pressure relief system discharged flammable chemicals to a safe location. The facts, conditions, and circumstances of the Karari incident show that the emergency pressure relief system for Eval Reactor 2 did not discharge to a safe location. Had Karari applied the lessons provided by these earlier chemical disasters, the company could have prevented this incident by ensuring the Eval Reactor 2 emergency pressure relief system discharged the flammable ethylene vapor to a safe location with no harm to people. Next slide. After the incident, Karari modified Eval Reactor 2's pressure relief system design to help ensure that this system discharges to a safe location. Karari provided the CSB with documents showing that the emergency pressure relief system now follows existing industry guidance and will discharge through piping aimed vertically upward. Karari also elevated the discharge point so that it now terminates about 90 feet above the ground. The redesigned discharge piping will now direct flammable ethylene vapor vertically into the air at a location Karari determined to be a safe location, including performing a dispersion analysis of this system. And the next slide. The CSB issued 12 recommendations to Karari to address the findings from the 17 safety issues. Recommendation 1 is shown on this slide. This recommendation addresses the emergency pressure relief system discharge design. The CSB recommended that Karari develop and implement an emergency pressure relief system design standard to ensure that each of these safety systems will discharge to a safe location. Include a requirement to periodically evaluate the site's emergency pressure relief systems and make appropriate modifications to ensure that each of these systems discharge to a safe location, such that material that could discharge from these safety systems will not harm people. This concludes my discussion of the Karari investigation And I will now turn it back to Steve Kleist.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for your work in bringing this investigation to its successful conclusion. The final presentation will be on the accidental release event that occurred at the Husky Superior Refinery in Superior, Wisconsin. Investigator in charge, Melike Ursus, will be making the presentation. Melike, please proceed.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Melike Ursus, and I am going to talk about the FCC unit explosion and asphalt fire at the Husky Superior Refinery. This incident occurred on April 26, 2018, while operators were shutting down the FCC unit for a planned maintenance event, also called a turnaround. Two vessels exploded at around 10 a.m., scattering explosion debris to their surroundings. Some of this explosion debris struck a nearby asphalt storage tank, which was 200 feet away. And asphalt started spilling out of this storage tank into the rest of the refinery, and then eventually ignited, caught fire at around 12 p.m. The CSB considers this event a hydrofluoric acid release near-miss event. There was a hydrofluoric acid, or HF, storage tank in the vicinity of the explosion. And had the explosion debris struck this tank, a toxic hydrofluoric acid vapor could have been released to the refinery and the surrounding community. However, the HF tank was not damaged and no HF release occurred during this incident. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot of the moment of the explosion. You can see some of the explosion debris in the air as it's being propelled in all directions. And you can also see some of the workers running away. Next slide, please. This picture was taken after the explosion, but before the asphalt fire. In the middle of the image, the star marks the location of the explosion. To the right, you can see tank 101, the asphalt storage tank, with asphalt pouring out of its side wall. And it actually was high enough in the tank wall that the asphalt spill jumped over the containment wall and spread to the rest of the refinery. Next slide, please. This is what remained of the two vessels that exploded, the primary absorber and the sponge absorber that you see on the left. Before the incident, these two distillation columns were actually taller than the toppled over column you see in this image right next to them. Next slide, please. There were over 100 pieces that were scattered throughout the refinery, ranging from a couple inches to several feet. And these are some photos of the larger pieces recovered after the incident. Next slide, please. Around noontime, the asphalt caught on fire, and this photo is taken from the north looking southward. So there was a large smoke plume traveling south for several hours during this incident. Next slide, please. This is the evacuation zone determined by the city in the hours following the ignition of the asphalt. It's 1 mile north of the refinery, 3 miles to the east and west, and 10 miles south of the refinery. There were two reasons for determining this evacuation zone. One of them was the smoke plume from the asphalt fire, and the other as a precautionary measure in case the HF tank was compromised during the fire. However, no HF was released during this incident. Next slide, please. The CSB determined that the Husky Superior Refinery explosion, which occurred during the shutdown of the FCC unit, was caused by inadvertently directing air inside the regenerator through the reactor and the main column, and then into the gas concentration unit. As the air continued flowing into the gas concentration unit, oxygen accumulated and formed a flammable mixture inside the two vessels that exploded. The oxygen also reacted with existing pyrophoric material inside this equipment, creating the ignition source for the explosion. Next slide, please. The CSB identified 6 safety issues that caused this incident, and I will briefly go over them now. Next slide, please. The first safety issue is transient operation safeguards. Transient operation is defined as the operating mode when the process is in transition and is not in its normal operations mode. Examples include startups, shutdowns, standby, and emergencies. These are typically procedure-based operations, meaning workers follow a written step-by-step procedure to complete a task. In this case, it was an FCC unit shutdown, which occurred typically once every 5 years. Next slide, please. The CSB determined that during the FCC unit shutdown, the refinery's transient operation safeguards were either not implemented or not effective. For example, the refinery did not implement a reactor steam barrier, which involves injecting steam into the reactor to raise its pressure to prevent air and hydrocarbon from mixing inside the process unit. The refinery also didn't implement a main column gas purge, which could have prevented accumulation of oxygen inside the equipment. The refinery only relied on catalyst slide valves for protection. These slide valves are between the reactor and the regenerator, and it's known in industry that they're not gas tight and they're not positive isolation devices. In this case, one slide was eroded, which made it more likely for air to leak into the rest of the process unit. Next slide, please. The second safety issue covers process knowledge. The CSB determined that the refinery's FCC technology knowledge was not sufficient to safely shut down the FCC unit. The refinery's FCC expertise was mainly in-house with minimal engagement with other refineries. Furthermore, the shutdown procedure had not been technically evaluated for at least 25 years prior to the incident, and possibly since it was first created in 1960 when the unit was built. Outside expert evaluations were limited to assessing the FCC unit's normal operation. As a result, for many years, refinery employees were not aware that their FCC shutdown procedure contradicted licensor guidance and put the FCC unit in an unsafe posture while they were shutting down every time. Next slide, please. The third safety issue covers process safety management system elements that contributed to this incident. The four that are discussed in this report are process safety information, operating procedures, process hazard analysis, and operator training. I will not go through them in detail here, but you can find more details in the report. Next slide, please. The fourth safety issue looked into industry knowledge and guidance. The Superior incident occurred less than a year after the CSB released its final investigation report in a similar 2015 FCC unit explosion in Torrance, California. In the Torrance incident, hydrocarbon flowed from the main column into the reactor, into the regenerator, until it found an ignition source in the flue gas system. Similar to the Superior incident, the CSB found that one of the causes of this incident was that the steam barrier was compromised. Next slide, please. The CSB determined that the Husky Superior refinery knew about the Torrance incident, but the workers did not recognize that inadvertent flow in the reverse direction was also possible. In addition, a lot of workers were not aware of the reactor steam barrier concept. The CSB determined that similar knowledge gaps may exist at other US refineries. Next slide, please. The fifth safety issue talks about the materials of construction of the two vessels that exploded. These vessels were constructed in 1960, and the materials used in these constructions are no longer recommended for this service. The Superior refinery in its rebuild has constructed these vessels out of newer grades of steels, which are more likely to fail by ductile fracture. Had the vessels not failed through brittle fracture, there would be fewer flying projectiles that damage surrounding equipment during the explosion. Next slide, please. The final safety issue examines the asphalt fire aspect of this incident. The asphalt storage tank was punctured on its side, and this is not typically considered during design evaluations for tanks and tank farms. In addition, the hot asphalt was stored above its flash point, which meant that once it was spilled, it could be ignited through a nearby ignition source and catch fire. The CSB determined that the likely ignition source actually came from inside the storage tank. Pyrophoric material inside the tank would have smoldered when exposed to oxygen when the hole was created on the side of the tank. Next slide, please. The CSB made 16 recommendations to prevent future recurrences of similar incidents. Many of these recommendations are to Synovus Energy, the current owner of Superior Refinery. Superior Refinery is still in its rebuild and is expected to start later this year. Next slide, please. Two of the major industry recommendations that came out of this investigation are to the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the American Petroleum Institute, API. The CSB recommends that the EPA inspect each refinery that operates an FCC unit in refineries that operate HF alkylation units. This is to ensure that the FCC units in these refineries have the safeguards that they need to prevent explosions similar to the ones that were seen at the Torrance Refinery in California and the Superior Refinery in Wisconsin. In addition, the CSB recommended that API develop a technical publication for the safe operation of FCC units. We believe that once this document is available, it will drive chemical safety change across all FCC units in the United States. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I turn it back over to Steve Kleist.
Thank you, Melanie Kay, for the presentation. And again, thank you for your hard work in bringing this investigation to its successful completion. At this point, the office has completed its presentations for this afternoon. So Steve, I will turn the meeting back over to you.
Well, thank you, Steve. And I want to also thank Lauren and Dan and Melike for those terrific presentations, and also especially for their hard work in getting those 3 reports pushed over the finish line. I think as all the people who are viewing this presentation today and participating in this meeting can see, these were 3 very complicated reports, especially Karari and the Husky Superior incident with complex facts, multiple issues related to causation. And then, as also was presented, that we made a number of recommendations for each one of them, 12 in the case of Karari and 16 in the case of Husky. A lot of terrific work has been done on those, but there's a lot more to be done now as we work with the recipients of those recommendations to ensure that they implement them to the best of their ability, and that we stay up to speed on what's going on with the implementation of those recommendations. So again, thanks to all 3 of them, and thanks to you, Chuck, Barbie, and also especially to Steve Kleist for your hard work and preparing those reports and the recommendations in them. So before we turn it over or open it up rather for public comments, I just want to make a couple of other remarks. As Sylvia Johnson mentioned during her earlier comments, this is the 25th anniversary of the Chemical Safety Board. The board began operations as an agency back on January 4th, 1998. We're trying to live up to the traditions of the agency and the terrific work that's been done over the years that Sylvia recited with the reports. And we're also going to be trying to highlight during the course of this year some of the important achievements of the board. So we'll be keeping people posted on that and let you know as we go forward what we may have in the works in that regard. And then also with regard to the recommendation that is in the Husky report, particularly to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA has a national enforcement and compliance initiative focused on preventing the accidental release of chemical substances. And the recommendation that we made in the Husky report, as well as one that we made in the Philadelphia Energy Solution reports, urges EPA to put an emphasis on inspecting facilities with hydrofluoric acid alkylation units to ensure that they are in compliance with all the necessary safeguards and other requirements there. And so we've appreciated US EPA's attention to this issue in the past, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work very closely with them in the future going on these and many other recommendations that we have put forward to that agency. So with that, we're going to open it up to the floor. Brian, I'll let you handle the logistics, but I want to just remind everybody again of the kind of the rules of the road here. Please raise your hand. I see many of you have done that already, but also please keep your comments to 3 minutes to the greatest extent possible. And when you're beginning your comments, please identify yourself as well as any organization or association that you happen to be with. And then last but not least, if you're on this call and you don't have time or don't want to make a comment publicly here, excuse me, you can always submit your comment by email to the CSB at the following address. It's public@csb.gov. And we'll take a look at that and try to follow up on whatever the comment is as best as we can. So with that, Brian, I'll turn it to you.
I've got a few hands raised. We'll start. Title list, it says ECB. I've asked you to unmute if you'd like to unmute, and you have 3 minutes. ECB, you have the floor.
Thanks. I'm just a concerned citizen. These comments or questions are probably directed towards Dan, who did the Corea America plant investigation. And some of these, this first comment, I got 2 comments. The first one applies probably essentially to maybe all the investigations. And I'd like to first step back and applaud the CSB for its 25 years. I can tell you, in safety meetings that I've been involved in, we leverage and borrow and share CSB videos. They're very, very well done. So continue with that. It's being used throughout the industry. I'm sure my experience is not limited.
Mm-hmm.
So in the obvious case where the relief device was not vented to a safe location, my question is, with OSHA and EPA and other jurisdictional agencies doing audits at facilities, how was this not caught? And my second question is on the Bhopal reference from 1984. My understanding of that incident over there in India, first of all, it was an act of sabotage. There was an employee who took a water hose and connected it to an underground MIC tank, which then overpressured the tank. This is during a turnaround. The tank relief device vented to a scrubber, which under normal operations would have been a safe location. The scrubber then vented to a flare tower, which again would be a safe location. And other than it being a turnaround and both of these devices, the scrubber and the flare tower, being down for the turnaround, if you will, and the other misfortunate is they had a pretty full underground tank of MIC there at the time. So it was a combination of complete errors. Also, my understanding is the Indian culture built their homes on the fence line, literally using the fence that surrounded the, I believe it was Union Carbide that owned the facility, and it was 49% owned by Union Carbide and 51% owned by the Indian government. But is that in the understanding of, quote, the safe location? And the note is that during a turnaround, that because these, and today, because of PSM, we would not design this or allow this to operate in that manner. But was that in the understanding, Dan, when you made the reference of citing Bhopal? Thanks.
Well, ECB, I'll use your initials. Thank you very much for the comment. I don't know if we can really comment so much on Bhopal. I believe Dan was referencing that as OSHA had referenced it when it was doing its PSM regulations. And if Dan wants to add something to that, he should certainly feel free to do so. But the other piece of this, I think you asked how did this happen? That's one of the issues that we address in our recommendations, and not only in the report, but in the recommendations going forward, to ensure that it doesn't happen again, and issues related to the design and other factors that Dan had pointed out in his report. Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or if I kind of covered it enough with that. So
Yeah, I mean, as far as the how it existed at Karari without anybody identifying that previously, that's not, if you look at the report, that's not the only relief valve that looks like it discharges horizontally. There's a number of devices there that look like they were problematic for many years that had gone undetected. And with Bhopal, I don't really want to, address the sabotage theory or try to validate that. But, ultimately, like what we're talking about with Bhopal is that when that relief valve went off with the scrubber down and the flare down, the methyl isocyanate ultimately discharged to an unsafe location that caused great harm to people. That's all we're saying with that correlation between the two.
great. Okay, well, thank you, Dan, and thank you, ECB, for the comments.
I see another hand raised. Again, this is an opportunity to leave comments. Have about 3 minutes. Khalid, I've just asked you to unmute if you have permission to take the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Khalid. I'm a third-year PhD student at Cal Berkeley studying chemistry. First of all, I had a comment and then a quick question. My comment is just, first of all, that I think the CSB is doing some really critical work. As someone who lives less than 15 miles from the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California, I think that, protecting the safety of communities is really important. And especially giving communities the tools to understand the risks that they might have, I think is incredibly critical. And the CSB, through both the reports and the videos, has been doing a really great job of really communicating that, especially for people who may not have sort of a technical understanding of it. So I guess my comment there is just sort of keep up the great work. And my question is, so I know a couple of weeks ago, there was an explosion at a permanganate facility at Karis Chemicals in LaSalle, Illinois. And I was wondering if there was planning to be any, or if there are any plans for investigations for that.
Well, thank you, Khalid. Let me address that. This may be something for Dan as well, but as I mentioned during our accidental release reporting rule, the comments that I made on that, incidents are supposed to be reported to us if they meet the criteria in our governing statute and in the regulations. And I haven't looked at the list to see if that particular incident is on there, but as a general practice, we do follow up with an incident report that we receive in terms of asking for additional information, asking for contact information on the key parties at the entity involved, the company, as well as do follow-up questions based on the information we receive from them. So if we've received a report on that incident, we will be following up to get more information on it. We did not deploy to it, to my knowledge, but if we did receive a report, we would be following up on it. Dan, do you have anything to add to that? So
It is on the list, and we have requested documents about that incident.
great. Well, thank you. And Khalid, thank you for the question, and we appreciate your interest in the CSB. Did you say, just real quick, did you say that you are a third-year student at Berkeley? Did I get that right? Can you unmute him, Brian?
Yes, that is correct. Third-year PhD student at UC Berkeley.
Third-year PhD student. Okay, a little bit difference between third-year student and third-year PhD. So, all righty. Well, thank you again so much for taking part in this, and thank you for your interest in your comments. So, Brian, anybody else?
I don't see any hands raised. I'll give it just a few more seconds here.
Great. We've had to
Steve,
prompt people into comments in the past, but we appreciate the ones we've already received today. So, all right, I'll do my going once, going twice, going 3 times routine here at the end of the meeting. Last chance. All right, seeing no more hands, we'll wrap it all up. So again, thank you everyone for taking part in this, participating in this event, and for those of you who've been on prior virtual meeting calls with us, we want to thank you again for taking the time to do that. We've said before in those meetings, your participation in these meetings is absolutely critical to us, not only to help us provide information to all of you, but for us to get information from you in the form of public comments, whether they're made orally at this meeting or, as a number of you have done, submitted them at times by email to the public@csb.gov email address. One last bit of housekeeping, and then we will wrap it up. And I'll try to make sure I get this right this time. Our next public meeting will be in April, on April the 27th, again at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And as we did with this meeting, we'll be sending out reminders of that as we get closer to that meeting date. So we hope you'll all join us then, and look forward to being with you at that time. So with that, we'll say goodbye. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Congratulations on your work.